Your father never knew who his own father was.
Yes. Nina, his mother, who he thought was his sister for 32 years, went to her grave with them.
At 32, Bobby Darin discovered that the woman he grew up calling his sister was actually his real mother. And if you think that revelation was the darkest moment of his life, you are mistaken. Because what Bobby endured in just 37 years is more than most people could bear in a lifetime. Recently unearthed documents, long overlooked interviews, and new family testimonies reveal a far more disturbing story about the lies he lived with, the battles he fought in secret, and the choices that may have cost him everything. And the most shocking part? Hollywood knew pieces of this truth for decades, but refused to say them out loud. Until now, Bobby Darin grew up believing he understood who he was and where he came from. His family life was unusual, but in the chaos of post-war New York, unusual did not necessarily mean suspicious. He was raised by a woman he called his mother, surrounded by relatives who seemed protective, close, and maybe a little too careful about what they shared. But for decades, Bobby never questioned any of it. He had dreams to chase, songs to write, and a career he hoped would lift him out of the cramped apartment that shaped his childhood. There was simply no time to imagine that the very people he trusted most were hiding the truth of his existence. That truth finally hit him in his early 30s, and it hit with the force of a lifetime's worth of betrayal. The woman he believed was his sister, Nina, had been his real mother all along, and the woman he had called Mom for decades was actually his grandmother. The revelation shattered him. According to several family accounts later brought forward, Bobby collapsed emotionally, pacing the room, repeating the same question again and again. Why did no one tell me? He was already a grown man, a husband and a father, yet suddenly he felt like a stranger in his own life. What made the discovery even more disturbing were the details behind the lie. Newly surfaced testimonies and family letters indicate that the deception had been planned from the beginning. The family feared the social consequences of a teenage pregnancy, and they believed hiding the truth was the only way to protect everyone involved. But that secrecy came at a heavy cost. Bobby did not only lose trust, he lost the foundation of his identity. Friends later recalled that after learning the truth, he spoke differently, moved differently, and carried himself with a strange, restless energy, almost as if something inside him had cracked open and could never be fully sealed again. He tried to keep moving, to keep performing, to keep producing the effortless charm the world expected. But behind that smile was a man trying to rebuild himself from the ground up. And the deeper he looked into his past, the more he realized how much had been hidden from him. This was only the beginning of the shadows that followed him, because the next secret waiting to surface was something he feared far more than the truth about his family. Long before the fame, Bobby Darin lived with a truth no child should ever carry. His body was failing him. Rheumatic fever had ravaged his heart when he was young, damaging it so severely that doctors quietly warned his family he might not survive into adulthood. They kept this prediction from him for years, but Bobby always sensed something was wrong. He tired faster than other kids, he struggled with basic physical activity, and he often found himself gasping for air while pretending nothing was happening. Even as a boy, he felt time slipping away, long before he understood why. By the time he reached his 20s, the consequences of that childhood illness were impossible to ignore. He lived with chronic pain, shortness of breath, and episodes where his heart raced uncontrollably. Friends later shared that Bobby often joked about death, but there was a seriousness behind his humor that unsettled them. He once said he wanted to accomplish more in 1 year than most people did in 10, because he never believed he would see old age. It was not an exaggeration. It was a fear that lived in his bones. Recently revisited medical notes and testimony from people close to him revealed just how dire his condition truly was. Bobby pushed himself through grueling performance schedules that would have worn down a perfectly healthy man. let alone someone with a compromised heart. He ignored warning signs that frightened those around him. There were nights he stumbled off stage pale and trembling, collapsing into a chair while insisting he was fine. Insiders later admitted they were convinced he was running on fear, adrenaline, and sheer determination. This desperation fueled his ambition. It was the engine behind his rapid rise, his genre hopping, and his refusal to slow down even for a moment. Every album, every appearance, every late-night writing session was driven by the same haunting belief: he was running out of time. And while the public saw confidence and swagger, Bobby was living inside a medical nightmare that he kept carefully hidden from fans, critics, and most of the industry. But the more he pushed, the more the pressure mounted. And soon his private war with his own body collided with a second battle, one that would take place not in a hospital, but in boardrooms, studios, and behind closed industry doors. Because Bobby's transformation from teen idol to serious performer came with a cost far darker than anyone knew. By the early 1960s, Bobby Darin had done the impossible. He had transformed himself from a teenage pop act into a respected, serious performer, something very few artists of his era ever managed to pull off. But behind that transformation was a war so bitter and chaotic that people close to him still talk about it in lowered voices. Because the moment Bobby tried to control his own career, powerful people in the industry pushed back harder than he ever expected. His managers and label executives depended on one thing: the clean-cut, smiling heartthrob who could sell records to teenagers by the million. They did not want a jazz singer. They did not want a songwriter with big ideas. And they definitely did not want a politically engaged folk performer. They wanted the version of Bobby Darin that made them rich, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to keep him locked into that box. Recently resurfaced contract notes paint a clearer picture of the pressure he faced. One executive warned him privately that if he abandoned pop music, he would never see the top of the charts again. Another pushed him into promotional appearances he begged to avoid, insisting his career depended on it. Bobby felt cornered, famous, but not free. Every step he took toward reinvention was met with threats disguised as advice, charm disguised as control. The tension eventually boiled over. Insiders described screaming matches behind closed doors, heated negotiations, and moments where Bobby stormed out of meetings refusing to sign anything. He wanted artistry. They wanted profit. He wanted evolution. They wanted predictability. And caught in the middle was a man whose health was declining as quickly as his ambition was rising. The more he tried to break free, the more the industry tightened its grip. What few people knew at the time was how much this pressure was costing him emotionally. Friends recalled nights where Bobby sat in silence backstage, completely drained, his hands shaking from the stress of trying to please everyone and satisfy no one. He was desperate to be taken seriously, but the constant battles left him exhausted, angry, and increasingly isolated. And just when the industry turmoil reached its peak, the cracks in his personal life deepened in devastating ways. Because the next blow came not from a boardroom, but from inside his own home. The story of Bobby and Sandra Dee looked perfect to the public, yet privately, it was unraveling faster than anyone could imagine. To the public, Bobby Darin and Sandra Dee were the golden couple. Their photographs covered magazines, fan clubs treated them like royalty, and Hollywood marketed their marriage as the perfect love story. But behind the polished image was a relationship held together by pressure, fear, and emotional wounds that neither of them truly knew how to handle. And, as new interviews and later released accounts have revealed, the cracks in their marriage began almost as soon as it started. Sandra Dee entered the marriage carrying her own private trauma, much of which she did not discuss publicly until years later. Bobby, meanwhile, was battling the identity crisis he had suffered after learning the truth about his mother, along with the constant dread of his failing heart. Two people burdened by secrets were suddenly responsible for holding up an image Hollywood insisted on selling. It created a fragile world where problems were ignored, Emotions were suppressed, and everything painful was tucked away behind a glamorous smile. Friends close to them described a house filled with pressure rather than peace. Bobby's career demands kept him on the road for weeks at a time, and when he was home, he was often exhausted, anxious, or consumed with the battles he was fighting in the industry. Sandra, still very young when they married, often felt abandoned, stuck in a world that expected her to be perfect while she was silently struggling. Arguments would erupt out of small misunderstandings, and deeper issues were left unresolved because neither wanted to admit how much they were hurting. Recently resurfaced statements from people close to the couple reveal that Bobby carried a heavy guilt over their struggles. He wanted to be Sandra's protector, but he was barely holding himself together. Some insiders claim he confided that his fear of dying young made him pull away emotionally, believing he was sparing her pain. But to Sandra, that distance felt like rejection. Two people trying to shield each other ended up drifting further apart. The divorce shattered Bobby. Those who knew him said he never truly recovered. His confidence faltered, his already fragile health worsened, and his ambition turned into something darker, a frantic need to reinvent himself again, as if a new identity could somehow erase everything that had fallen apart. And that reinvention would soon lead him down a path that shocked even his closest friends. Because Bobby's next chapter was not glamorous at all. It was a disappearance, a breakdown, and a transformation so drastic that even Hollywood did not know what to make of it. After the divorce and years of industry battles, Bobby Darin reached a breaking point that few people around him recognized until it was too late. One day, he simply disappeared from the version of himself the world knew. He pulled away from Hollywood, distanced himself from old collaborators, and retreated into a small trailer home in the Colorado mountains. Insiders later said he vanished, like he was trying to escape his own name. And that description was not far from the truth. For months, Bobby lived almost completely off the grid. He grew a beard, changed his appearance, and stopped performing. The confident star who once dominated stages now struggled to even speak about the future. Newly surfaced interviews from people who visited him during this period describe a man who had become painfully thin, pale, and withdrawn, sleeping irregularly, pacing through the night, and talking about the shadows of his past, as if they were still chasing him. His heart condition was worsening. His identity was shattered. And without Sandra, without stability, he sank into a level of isolation he had never experienced before. This was the period where he created Bob Darin, the stripped-down, politically influenced folk singer, far removed from the glamorous performer the world once adored. While the shift has often been blamed on the political climate of the time, recently revisited testimonies suggest something far more personal was happening. He was reinventing himself because he no longer recognized the man he once was. The heartbreak, the industry conflicts, and the childhood betrayal had all converged into a single, overwhelming truth. Bobby Darin did not know who Bobby Darin was anymore. Friends who saw him during these months described a frightening sense of urgency in everything he said. He talked openly about death, about time running out, and about needing to do something meaningful before it was too late. His health was declining rapidly, and he felt it. Some even claim he admitted he was preparing for the end, sorting through belongings, writing notes, and speaking about legacy more than longevity. And yet, despite his declining health and fading energy, he pushed himself back into music with a desperate determination. He re-emerged with new material and a new sound, but the transformation was not a comeback. It was a final sprint, because the clock inside his body was louder than ever, and the decisions he was about to make would lead directly to the operation that many still believe should never have happened. By the early 1970s, Bobby Darin's heart was failing faster than anyone realized. His years of overwork, emotional strain, and the childhood damage left by rheumatic fever had pushed his body to its limit. Yet Bobby refused to stop performing. He kept touring, kept recording, and kept pretending he was stronger than he really was. Insiders later revealed that he would collapse backstage, clutching his chest, refusing help until the pain passed. He was convinced he could outrun fate if he just stayed moving. But his body was reaching its breaking point. Medical records and testimonies revisited in recent years paint a far more alarming picture than what fans ever saw. Bobby's heart was enlarged, weakened, and struggling under even mild stress. Doctors recommended cautious treatment and rest, serious rest, but Bobby rejected anything that would take him away from the stage. He had already spent too much time hiding from the world in isolation. Now he wanted every remaining day to count. This mindset set the stage for a decision that would become one of the most heartbreaking chapters of his life. In December 1973, Bobby chose to undergo open heart surgery, a high-risk procedure that carried severe dangers for someone with his history. Several medical professionals later suggested that his condition made the operation nearly impossible to survive. One even said he was far too fragile to be opened up. But Bobby went forward anyway. Some believed he genuinely thought it was his only chance. Others felt he knew the risks and was simply out of options. In the days leading up to the surgery, he behaved with an eerie sense of calm. Friends noticed he was more reflective, more sentimental, almost as if he knew these were his final conversations. He spoke about his son, he spoke about legacy, and he spoke about time, how little of it he felt he had left. The hospital staff later recalled that he walked into the surgical wing quietly, without fear, as if he had made peace with whatever outcome waited for him on the other side. The operation did not save him, it took him. His weakened body could not withstand the procedure. Complications struck almost immediately. And just like that, Bobby Darin's race against time was over at 37 years old. The world mourned the sudden loss, but those who knew the full story, the fear, the pain, the secrets, understood that his ending had been written long before he stepped into the operating room. But even after his passing, the most unsettling revelations had not yet surfaced, because new documents, buried testimonies, and long silent voices would soon resurface, and they would change everything people thought they knew about Bobby Darin. For decades, Bobby Darin's life was told like a familiar Hollywood tragedy, a talented star who rose fast, burned bright, and left too soon. But recent discoveries have shattered that simplified version, revealing a far more haunting and complex truth. In the last several years, biographers, family members, and researchers gained access to documents, private letters, and long-shelved interview notes that had never been made public. And together, they paint a picture of a man far more tormented and far more aware of his fate than anyone ever realized. Some of the most startling findings come from the Darin family archive. Letters exchanged between relatives during Bobby's childhood show how carefully the truth about his mother was orchestrated and protected. In one note, a family member warned that telling him the truth could break him. That prediction proved tragically accurate. These letters reveal a family living in fear, not only of public judgment, but of the emotional storm they believed Bobby would unleash if he ever found out who he truly was. Other newly unearthed material focuses on his health. Medical statements, previously overlooked due to privacy restrictions, confirm that Bobby's heart was deteriorating years faster than doctors anticipated. One evaluation described his condition as progressing at a rate inconsistent with normal decline, suggesting he may have sensed the end coming long before he admitted it. He was not being dramatic when he talked about living on borrowed time. He was being honest. Then there were the revelations from Sandra Dee's later interviews that remained unpublished until after her passing. In them, she described moments when Bobby confided fears he never shared publicly. The terror of dying young, the exhaustion of carrying a false identity, and the weight of trying to reinvent himself when he felt like a stranger in his own skin. She said he often spoke as though his life was winding down, even when he was only in his 30s. The biggest shock came from testimonies recorded by musicians and colleagues who waited decades to reveal what they had seen. They recalled Bobby's late-night conversations about legacy, unfinished promises, and the feeling that every decision he made was part of a race he knew he would not win. His reinvention, his disappearance, his relentless work ethic. They were not the decisions of a confused artist. They were the decisions of a man preparing for an ending he felt closing in on him. These revelations do not just add detail to Bobby Darin's story. They change the meaning of his entire life. They show a man fighting against secrets he never asked for, a body he could not trust, and an industry that tried to shape him into something he was not. And they reveal why his final days, his final choices, and his final words hit so much harder now than they ever did before. Because when the hidden pieces fall into place, Bobby Darin's life no longer looks like a tragedy. It looks like a warning, one Hollywood ignored until it was far too late.